Good morning. Welcome to at least my first AdFocus Live conversation. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and hopefully, we'll have a fantastic and interactive conversation. My first guest needs very, very little introduction. Um, Alistair, thank you, Alistair Mokoena, thank you for letting me exercise my jury chair privileges and getting you on board to have our conversation. Yeah, I'd like to welcome you, and I suppose first things first, check in. How are you settling in? In COVID times, especially.
Hey to me and morning everyone. Yeah, geez, who would have thought 2020 would turn out like this? But I think this is a sign of the future. It's a sign of things to come. It's almost like God decided that human beings need to slow down and take stock of what's really important, but also learn to relate again. So I've started a new job virtually, and I feel like I'm in a long distance marriage where you really have to hone in on those communication skills and the people skills and really listen, sort of intensely to what's said and what's not said. So, yeah, but I'm having fun. I'm working in a matrix organization where I deal with colleagues from all over the world, and technology enables us to do that.
Yeah. So it's kind of stretched the world a little bit, right? It's made your world a little bit more expansive.
Yeah, and highly connected, which is amazing.
So you spoke about slowing down, right? And I have this. I came across this article that challenges that notion a little bit. I'm literally going to read from it. I kind of saw it in the early hours of this morning, and I thought, yes, this is the perfect way actually to capture. I think the context of the conversation that we want to have. So we want to talk about how we envisage demonstrating, showing, and delivering value within the industry. And that's really across marketing departments and their agency partnerships. And we will delve into the depth of your experience in order to frame that kind of comprehension and begin to explore that subject. But I loved how this was phrased, and I'd like to take it. I'd like to take it from there. So it's an article that came from KPMG India, and it doesn't refer specifically to the advertising industry, but I think that we are definitely not exempt. It refers to COVID-19 as the perfect storm for digital acceleration, right? And the first two paragraphs, it reads. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed a clear digital divide, right? That those companies that already invested in digital operating models and enablement have fared much better than those which did not. And in fact, for many businesses, the continuity of operations critically depends on their digital capabilities. And I thought, ping, because it relates to the question that I wanted to raise with you around skilling, I think, in agencies. My first question to you with that in mind um, is really how do you frame the challenge that we have? Initially I had said to you, COVID notwithstanding, but you are speaking with a senior account management person. And why a senior account management person and not necessarily the CEO or the MD is because the most senior account management person is directly interfacing with the client on a day-to-day basis and dealing with the client's nervousness, I think, and unsettledness around the changes that we're going through. And in fact, how would you take that even further and frame this for an ECD who's measured on their creative output, right? And often there's a perceived tension between digital accountability and creative capability or empowerment. So how do you phrase it? You'll also note that I've left Strat out of this because, the discussion around Strat and whether it's obsolete is also a big thing. And I'd like to double click on that further down the line.
Mm. Yeah, to me, I think internet access has really changed the whole marketing game. The fact that everybody's now connected, everybody has a cell phone, has really changed the playing field. If you think about it, maybe if we can just zoom out a little bit to the original communication model, which was sender, receiver, and message. I mean, you really had two parties and one piece of content. Fast forward to today, anybody can produce content. The entire marketing and advertising ecosystem has been disrupted by, the advent of digital and internet connectivity, and the mobile platform. And what consumers are trying to do now is shut out all the irrelevant noise. So relevance has become the single most important thing. If you want permission to communicate with me, the content has to be useful, helpful, and relevant to me, or else it's just noise. And I think for the longest time we were working with blunt instruments as communicators. We were almost flying blind. I remember years ago as a young brand manager presenting budgets and brand plans to an exco, and the CEO would often, lower his glasses and go, "How do you know that your spend is going to deliver returns? And how do you attribute that blip on the Nielsen market share chart to that TV ad? Please show me the causal nexus between your marketing plan and the results. Is it not sales that's actually driving market share growth? Why do you think it's marketing?" And because we didn't have data, all we had was anecdotal feedback from, Vox Popsies, from focus groups and stuff. And sometimes you would do quant research, but it really was a blunt instrument. And then we would often get away with the old adage that only 50% of marketing spend is effective. We just don't know which 50%. Unfortunately, that joke isn't funny anymore. So I think when you're thinking about communications and the responsibility of building brands and helping people access those brand propositions, you've got to be thinking about how relevant is this message? How relevant is this brand promise? And who is it relevant to? Am I speaking to the right audience, or am I spraying and praying? The ability to take the audience and segment them according to their interests and target specifically and efficiently, is the new game. So I think for me, it's a very simple thing. You have to have technology that enables you to gather data, collect data, clean data, slice and dice it in a way that helps you to really drive meaningful conversion across the funnel. That's the challenge today.
So you've touched on, in fact, something that relates to my next question. Whom do you see as the custodian of that responsibility? And the context was that for the longest time, Strat was the discipline that was, that was kind of seen as having the responsibility of understanding research, cutting, slicing, and dicing, as you've just said. Certainly in my lived experience, I'm experiencing different expectations, more output-driven expectations of the sort of work that I do. And in that regard, I want to ask you again, like I said, who do you see as owning the responsibility of constantly engaging with research, information, data? And is there a way that you can form kind of a marriage around that for all the disciplines?
Okay, cool. So I think we have to look at this as an ecosystem. If you are an ad agency and you are servicing a client that has great data, especially first-party data, that client is able to give you a brief that clearly and succinctly segments who they're talking to, what content they're delivering to who, what time of the day, what part, which part of the funnel they're wanting to actually impact. And if your client has that, you as the agency partner, you also need to be digitally mature to be able to deal with that. And if you don't have that capability, it causes friction in the relationship. And then on the other hand, there has to be a value exchange between me as the end user who's giving you access to my data and you as the marketer. I'm looking for relevance as the end user, and you, the marketer, you're looking for the ability to target me at different parts of my life, different parts of my day, with unique experiences that are bespoke and relevant. So I think a mismatch between agency and client often comes about where there's a asymmetry when it comes to technology, asymmetry when it comes to your fluency with data, with being able to mine data, asymmetry with understanding omni-channel marketing and data-driven marketing. And measurement is a big thing,
Yeah.
right? So it boils down to how do we then define success today?
Right.
There are so many ways to actually define success. So if I'm building my career as an advertising professional, what does success look like today versus 2, 3, 5 years ago? That's a very important conversation because that success isn't just personal. That success has to be reciprocated in a relationship where there's shared value, right?
Would you
Where,
say, sorry,
yeah.
would you say, because I had this question booked for further in our conversation, but would you say that measure of success, especially the historical reference, and that, would you say it's important for context setting? Because the question that I had in mind was, for someone that is in the middle stages of their career right now, looking at the future and looking to stay and looking for tenure in the industry, what do they reference? What do they work with now in order to enable themselves to envisage the future?
So I mean, the two easiest levers that a lot of people access are fame and fortune. So if you're a young person thinking about building your career, right, you're thinking about
Fame,
fame.
fortune.
I want to be the best. I want to be highly decorated. I want to be celebrated. I want to be known. And then fortune is about wealth in its broadest sense. It could be
Right.
material wealth, it could be knowledge, it could be experience, it could be networks, relationships you build, and so on and so forth. So I just think that we need to understand that the value, conversation has evolved so much because
Yeah.
technology has enabled us to have a lot more clarity and honesty and granularity. And we have to make it our business to drive appreciation for the science of marketing and advertising as much as we give effort to the art and of marketing and advertising. So I think the word science is becoming a lot more commonplace because technology enables you and arms you to have a scientific discussion around what influences what. We've been saying for many years that somebody has to find the marketing holy grail or the advertising holy grail, right?
But I mean,
And it's not that simple,
did,
eh?
did the marketing or advertising holy grail ever exist? And once again, I'm referring to the various phases of your career
Yeah.
and exposure that you've had, because I feel like this holy grail is this
No.
elusive thing. But like,
Yeah, I mean, I think pursuing the holy grail is probably as futile as pursuing perfection. There is no holy grail simply because success is a combination of art and science. Now, art is very subjective. There's no limits to the extent of creativity out there, right?
right?
And that's why creativity will always be important, regardless of how prominent technology becomes in our lives. The biggest differentiator has to be creative experiences. Just imagine a highly technical or digitized experience that lacks soul, that lacks charm, that lacks, kind of magic. And that's actually what you get when you starve yourself of creativity.
Okay, so you've led me to another thought. Again, it wasn't in the list of thoughts I had, but some examples. I don't like it, by the way, when I get asked this question, but I'm going to ask you nonetheless. Some examples of where the perfect confluence of creativity and the use of information and data is demonstrated. Can you think of like a couple of examples? Even more so in the time that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I look at what brands have done in the last couple of months, during this pandemic, one could argue that there's been a lot of upper end of the conversion funnel activity where there wasn't a lot of selling or conversion happening. It was really around brand love. It was really around we understand what people are saying. With social media listening tools, brands were able to tap into conversations and watch what being said and what the sentiments were, people's fears. And remember, human beings are driven by love and fear. So brands would watch what are people saying to express love, to express fear and concerns, and they would come with the right messages. So if I look at what people like Nike and then did, Coca-Cola, all these brands, alcohol brands that were not selling but still wanted to build a relationship. That talks a lot to accessing data and being able to personalize messages. Because remember, mass personalization is what just sort of differentiates winners from losers today. Spraying and praying doesn't help anybody. If we look at the pressure on the bottom line, if we look at the pressure on the marketing rent to really, really justify itself, then one cannot get away without talking about performance and how are your marketing activities translating into results, and therefore efficiencies become important. So if you're
Right.
spending money, are you getting the best return? And you need to be able to show that. So, and that's where personalization comes in. And with personalization, one is able to even talk about a very important metric of customer lifetime value. How
Right.
if I encounter a consumer, I've got to be able to work out how much this consumer is worth to me.
Right.
Because if I'm deploying investments to engage the consumer, I need to be able to show a return.
So there's two thoughts that come to mind, right? And I'm going to go back to my piece of reading. Another kind of paragraph that stood out for me talks again about digital acceleration. It says boards and markets are taking note, and consequently, digital transformation likely to be one of the most strategic topics on the boardroom agenda.
Yeah.
And then what stood out for me is the question is how soon organizations can shift into the new digital business and operating models. Now, I want to talk about this idea of a time frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, there's two ways. The time frame relates to how we evaluate longevity in the
Yeah.
industry, but the time frame also talks about the continuum of measurement. Let's talk about that a little bit. I want to understand your view on how, again, I'm going to bring it back to the operations
Yeah.
of an agency and a marketing department. What is that
Mm-hmm.
continuum of demonstrating value? Typically, you would have your, I don't know, you'd have your reviews on a quarterly basis, right? Is that enough?
Yeah. I think that a lot of the clients I speak to say to me that they don't do 5-year plans anymore. A 5-year plan is just like an aspiration that you just think, okay, maybe in 5 years time I might want my business to look like this. But the reality is it's very hard to imagine 5 years out, because the rate of change now is so intense that your business model might be forced to change in 18 months time. And if I think of growth horizons, horizon one being a kind of current business, horizon two being adjacent or complementary businesses or services, and horizon three being complete revolution of your business model.
So let's talk about Horizon One, current business.
Yeah.
Put that for me in time frames.
Okay. So horizon one is anything between 6 to 12 months, right?
Yeah.
So if you did brand plans end of 2019 for 2020, I want to
Yeah.
see what I want to
Even
see what.
the term 2020, like when I hear
So
it, I get
where are we
uncomfortable.
now? August 2020. I want to see what those plans look like, and I want to see how much of that strategy is still relevant today. This time last year, you had unfettered access to touch points, right? You can go into retail and do stuff. If you're a Samsung selling devices and you launch, the S20, you had the ability to forecast that clients would or customers would walk into your store, look at the devices, and your in-store promoters would come and explain the merits of this wonderful shiny object, right? Fast
May
forward to today, yeah.
I just wanted to throw a twist in there, because we all know how the eventing and activations business has been directly affected in
Yeah.
in the worst way. Now, that time frame that we were
Yeah.
talking about and the remodeling related to an activations business. So
Yeah.
I interrupted your thought process, but I
Yeah.
couldn't hold back.
No,
I
no,
want to
cool.
throw that in.
Yeah. So now electronic shops don't want people milling about the store. There's a queue outside, and only 2 or 3 people are let in at a time, right?
My word.
And consumers walk into the electronic shop and they want to spend as little time in the shop as possible.
Right.
There's a limit, there's a cap on dwell time now.
Right.
So what you do is you research online and possibly purchase offline, right? So you spend disproportionate amount of time as a consumer thinking about a new cell phone online, checking out everything, the specs and everything. You are sorted. By the time you walk into the store, you're ready to transact and convert and buy the thing.
Right.
So that's how the landscape has changed. But if you're sitting doing brand plans last year, your goals would look like this, your objectives would look like this, the tasks that are informed by the objectives would look like this, and the activities, that are the creative solves to the tasks would look like this. But
Right.
fast forward today, where the landscape has changed so much, where there's limitations to how much personal contact you can have, where
Right.
there's a shift where consumers are spending their time, where data prices are being subsidized, download speeds have increased at no cost, and stuff like that. And people are just saying, listen, it's not worth venturing out, it's too risky. I'm at home, I've got this time, engage me, but engage me with sensible, relevant content. So when
Right.
we think about metrics of success, first of all, we've got to ask the question, is digital an enabler or is digital the strategy? You know, you were asking about the rate of
I've
digital
never actually
transformation.
thought about that. Yeah. Yeah.
You asked about the speed of digital transformation. Well, let's not fool ourselves. There's still a lot of people who don't understand how digital works. There's still a lot of people who are threatened by digital. There's still a lot of
Absolutely.
people who are threatened by technology. The mere mention of machine learning or artificial intelligence scares a lot of people because when they think about the perceived binary relationship between a job held done by a person and thinking done by a computer. So all those concepts lead to a lot of anxiety and fear and sometimes paralysis, right?
Yeah.
So, but then enter COVID, and all of a sudden you realize, geez, I need e-commerce capability. I need, I need, I need data. I need to be able to talk to me, and I don't know where to find to me. I don't know how to access to me. I don't know. So there are so many unknowns that have forced decision makers to really get out of their comfort zone and invest in this thing called digital transformation. And that's what I'm saying. Is it an enabler or is it the strategy? But yeah.
So you immediately referenced decision makers. I want to understand the depth of how digital transformation needs to live in an organization. And I mean the organization I'm referring to, or the industry I'm referring to specifically, is marketing comms. Is the agenda and the urgency of digital transformation something that lives in the boardroom? I mean, among the board, among the execs, and how do we trickle it down? How do we trickle it down?
So,
If we do, by the
okay.
way.
So, yeah. So I always like to contextualize marketing and advertising. I don't want to think of it as a silo. Marketing
Yes.
and advertising is a function within a broader business model, right?
Right.
Because it's really about you've got the product, you've got the service. How do you now get it out? How do you do a push and pull strategy to ensure that that which you have made now gets sold and gets bought
Right.
many times, right?
Right.
Um, and if we as communication practitioners just focus on our own little world and bubble and ecosystem, we will become a victim of of decisions that are made by other people. So digital transformation mustn't happen to us. We have to drive digital transformation. If
Right.
consulting firms are talking about digital transformation to clients, they are creating the ecosystem and the landscape and defining it for clients.
Got you.
Now,
So
advertising agencies, if they want to compete effectively, have to make it their business to have that to actually have this whole conversation, um, and be able to map out where they add value and where they can partner with clients. It's very easy to be left out of that conversation as an ad agency if you're not talking data, you're not talking measurement, you're not talking performance, you're not talking, like basically, if you can't have a digital maturity argument or conversation when you're presenting yourself as a potential partner to a client, you really run the risk of limiting your sphere of influence. I'm not saying that agencies will cease being relevant. No, that'll never happen. But all I'm saying is that you have power over how much influence you can exert in a client agency relationship. You just have to make the right investment choices.
Right. So I'm going to go back to my original question around the time frame. We spoke about, you know, the kind of like first window, which is the short term. What do we look at then in the medium term? And I also want to correlate that with this idea of digital maturity, because I'm figuring that there are growth nodes and there are milestones that we have to work with, that we have to understand. What is the middle part of the step and the time frame thereof?
Okay, so I think we've got to be thinking about renovation versus innovation, right? And renovation is really tinkering with the short term. How do I optimize in the short term? How do I solve for short term? Whereas innovation for me is a little bit more forward looking. It's saying, what are the trends? What's the potential of technology? You know, if at the moment we're not working with data in the short term, the easiest thing to do is to buy third party data and start doing some intelligence, some science around it, some business intelligence to inform our thinking, right? In the medium term, which is a little bit, more of an investment down the line, we could be looking at how do we equip ourselves to have access to first-party data, and I'm talking both clients as well as agencies, right?
Right.
And I think people shouldn't be too precious about what their core business is, because being precious about a core business is like being married to a business model, and being married to a business model puts blinkers around you because that business model doesn't have any eternal right to success. It might get displaced or disrupted, as we've seen.
My word. So I'm receiving that, and it gets my back up, right? And I'm coming from a place of empathy with a creative agency, right? So if they are not married to their core business at the moment, what do they do? What do they look at in with a future lens?
Well, I mean, your core business is what has defined you up to now, because your clients were buying X from you, right?
Yeah.
Clients were buying a TV ad and hoping that target audience 55% of the audience will see it at least 3 times, and maybe there'll be brand recall, and there'll be image attributes uplift, and there'll be sales, and therefore market share growth, right? That's what clients were buying for the longest time.
Right.
Now, digitally mature clients are looking at the conversion funnel and they're saying, I'm not interested in blunt instruments anymore. I want to talk measurement. I want to talk performance. I want to talk automation. And I want to talk A/B testing. I want to talk real-time optimization. And I want to know if this ad is working. If it's not working, I'm taking it off today. They want to take a TV ad and segment it into 5 or 6 little chunks and say
Right.
which one is working, right? So being able to rise to the challenge of digital maturity requires investment shifts. It requires thinking about new services. It requires redefining certain things. Is this thing an input or is it the main deal? For example, if you take data, for the longest time, data was seen as an input into the creative process. But one might get to a point where you realize actually data is oil. Data can be sold. Data services can be, so there's
Yeah.
retooling that needs to happen as you think about where is the world going, right?
Right.
And this is not about selling out. This is about understanding why you're in business and what's going to keep you in business, right? And it's also about understanding that as an ad agency, you have the potential to matter to more than just a CMO. There's many other members of the C-suite that the advertising world doesn't sell to. But if we were
Right.
to reimagine the world, we could turn all those other C-suite people into potential customers and clients going forward.
Right. You actually clicked on what I was going to ask next, because we've had quite a lengthy discussion, that relates to the agency, but perhaps a mindset shift and that kind of readjustment on a CMO's part? You know, what's that critical shift if it comes in one frame, if there's 3 key points, you know, what does even the kind of vision of digital maturity for a CMO, what is that? Is it different? You know, what is that journey?
So, for example, if you sitting there as a CMO and saying, "I want to grow my brand," right, and I want to understand where the source of growth is going to come from, and I want to understand if my spend is giving me the best return or not, right? And if I set myself a challenge that says, I wanna achieve 20% efficiency in how I deploy my marketing budget. So I wanna see a 20% improvement in the cost, and I want to improve effectiveness of my spend. So that's what AdFocus is about, right? Let's look at brands and businesses that have been able to deploy their marketing and advertising prowess to create value, right? So as a CMO today, you know that you've got much more potent tools to help you achieve that and define that and defend your investment choices. A couple of years ago, you didn't. You know, there was no attribution to speak of. Today, a CMO is able to attribute success to a particular intervention in his or her marketing plan or business plan or even a campaign. So I think that we have access to so much more evidence of how effective and important marketing and advertising is. And we're able to present it more scientifically, even though it's a creative product.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite a powerful thing. So I want to ask you how you take all of this information, right? If I weren't facilitating this call, to be very honest, I would be sitting with a notebook right now, you know, making notes. I would like to skill myself. Where do I begin?
I think
pointers for when one begins, because I think that there's a plethora of information as we've identified. But step one, what's a step one takes one to skill themselves and skill within the organization for the future?
Yeah. So, I mean, Stephen Covey wrote in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, that begin with the end in mind, right? So you as a communication practitioner, you are creating an experience for the end user. Put yourself in the shoes of the end user and say, what kind of experience would I like to receive? And work backwards.
That's incredible.
I want brands to serve relevant, informative, useful, entertaining content that's a meaningful use of my time, right? And then work out what is the value chain that delivers that. First of all, you gotta know me as an individual, my likes and dislikes, when I'm most open to receiving messages, what kind of messages, how long must the message be, what is my concentration span, what do I respond to? Am I auditory? Am I visual? You know, like what kind of messaging do I respond to? Do I respond to facts? Do I respond to storytelling? All those things are important. And what is my propensity to spend? You know, not just aspiration. There are a lot of people who aspire to driving a Bentley, but very few people can afford a Bentley, right? So all the eyeballs that are watching Bentley ads that'll never buy a Bentley, how useful are those? You know what I mean? So think about the experience you want to create.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
It's true. Think about the experience you want to create, and then think about the value chain that needs to be in place to make that happen. And it's not very difficult. Data, I think, if we embrace data as a useful tool in our arsenal, we've got to think about what does it take to be an agency that delivers data-driven marketing. And the mere mention of the word data-driven marketing should not cause an allergic reaction. It is not an anemic tool. It is a tool that's imbued with creativity, because creativity is a differentiator. But you gotta have the engine in place, and the engine has intelligence. So for the longest time, IT departments invested in business intelligence units to enable businesses to, to achieve mass personalization. Now, we as comms practitioners, we are partnering with those businesses, but we therefore need to be able to match them when it comes to digital maturity.
Alistair, it also sounds to me like intelligence is no longer just a tool, but it's an ethic. It sounds like it's something that needs to be embedded in the culture, in the DNA of the business, and the way of doing things. That's what I'm picking up. And you kind of to go back to kind of the flow of the conversation. It also sounds like perhaps planning and the investment takes place at a at an executive level in order to be able to project the future, like you said, start with an end in mind, right? So to fashion the dream, the agency of the future, so to speak, or even the agency and client partnership or relationship of the future, that's where it's envisioned. But the means to enable it literally need to be trickled throughout the organization, literally from the bottom up.
I completely agree with you. I think value creation must be democratized. Every person in the organization has a responsibility to create value and should not destroy it. And data is such a precarious thing because the privilege of being able to handle somebody's data comes with the responsibility to act ethically,
right,
to respect privacy and confidentiality, to respect boundaries. We have to use data ethically. And therefore, if you have data in your business, everybody in the business who has access to it has to subscribe to those rules.
Talk about access. Let's talk about data and access, because for the longest time, we've also had this experience where, especially the agency client partnership, the access to the data is highly, highly restricted. And it's highly, highly controlled, and controlled even in terms of the timeframes, the window, for example, within which one is able to access data. In fact, I'll refer to an example that we both experienced where the client was so restrictive with their data that you had to be physically sitting in front of them in order to get access to the research. But once they're done presenting, you cannot walk away with it. Now, how do you that access, and how do you put in place the right controls to empower and enable the democracy?
Well, I mean, a year ago, if you said to companies they have to make sure that their offices are disease-free, virus-free, completely sanitized, they would laugh at you. They'd say, how on earth? That's unrealistic. That's impractical, right? So when I say we've got to be making conscious choices around how do you want to position ourselves, that's why I'm saying business models and core business definitions and stuff must be fluid. Because if you are going to present yourself as a custodian of data and an agency that's able to work effectively with data, you've got to be able to prove that you've got the requisite environment. You've got access control. You've got an appreciation of the Copy Act. You've got, you've got systems and tools. You've got, I mean, when you go to clients and say, trust me with your brand, trust me with this information, you have to show that you are worthy of that trust. And then your systems, are actually geared to ensure that ethics is taken into consideration. You've got to be able to show evidence of automation because, look at big data. Which human being can handle big data on their own without the assistance of machines? How are you going to keep the data? How are you going to store? So there's all sorts of considerations which must be in place. And I think the challenge for many ad agencies is that unless you see that as valuable, you're going to see it as one big expense and maybe as a digression from your core business.
It feels like COVID-19 has accelerated that consciousness, right? in a piece that I wrote and a talk that I set up, I said it feels like COVID-19 has dragged us kicking and screaming into the fourth industrial revolution in the industry. We were sitting there, kind of resenting already the changes that are happening within the industry, both from, there's a spectrum of changes that we can refer to. But we've been dragged kicking and screaming, okay? Now I want to turn that a little bit, and I want to turn the value conversation to the elephant in the room, the case for awards, right? Us sitting here as jury members, okay? But there's a myriad of awards, quite frankly, out there. What is the case? We've had this discussion, but I'd like to share it as well with other people.
Yeah.
What do you think the case is for awards? Because the awards, are how can I say it? The playing field for demonstrating, glory and our flamboyance in the industry. What's the case? When we are trying to still comprehend value, right? We're grappling with the subject. The awards, what's their role?
Yeah. So I mean, if you take a typical conversion funnel, right? There's different stages from awareness to, trial, to adoption, to purchase, to advocacy and loyalty, and so on. So there's different ways to kind of measure success and value at each part of the funnel, right? So when I look at the marketing and advertising ecosystem, I say, let's apply a systems thinking approach to it. There's drivers and outcomes. Sometimes you want to acknowledge success at a driver level, not so much the outcome. So you want to drive the right behavior. So you want to, for example, strategy is an input into the creative process. You might want to award great strategic thinking.
Right.
That's not an outcome. It's a driver of the creative process, right? On a different day, you might want to award a brilliant piece of creative, from production values to artistic creativity, to, highly crafted, beautiful, well thought out piece of creative you want to award there. On a different day, you might want to look at performance and conversion. It doesn't matter how cheesy or slapstick you think the campaign is. Did it shoot the lights out in terms of conversion, in terms of sales? And so sometimes we'll celebrate drivers, and other times we'll celebrate outcomes. So there will always, for as long as you want behavior change, because what gets measured gets done. For as long as you want to drive behavior change, human beings respond to incentives. We also, if you want to lift all boats, we must shine the light on success use cases and celebrate those. And if you want to teach and train people, we have to codify lessons. So we have to make it our business to look for excellence across the ecosystem and say, right, that deserves celebration, that deserves amplification. And then I think the various awards will find themselves in that ecosystem.
Right. So I'm going to kind of try and summarize and make room for questions, because we've got about 17 minutes left. But just by means of an intro, we definitely agree that embracing digital transformation and perhaps the data that sits in front of us is the way forward. I'm also picking up that you're saying, that this needs to be pervasive, just as we talk about, when we talk about transformation in terms of the BEE code or, that code, and we talk about how pervasive it is within the organization, it sounds like, and in fact, it's quite evident that there's an additional layer of embracing technology, and not as an occasion, not as a moment, but rather as a way of living into the future. I'm also picking up that COVID-19 has merely just accentuated the urgency of this. And if anything, I suppose even your transition into a new role is a demonstration of that. You could have been anywhere in the world, but there you are, grounded and traveling in a very different kind of way. And so for the agency and client partnership to work, we've got to be walking the journey towards digital maturity in the nodes in which it comes in. That's what I'm picking up. And then finally, I'm going to ask you again about, the piece of advice that you would give. And I'm going to ask the piece of advice you would give, I guess, at two very different life stages. One is, we've got the student category, for example, in the AdFocus Awards, right? Now that portfolio, that measurement largely currently is creatively based. What is the piece of advice, with the benefit of the entire journey that you've walked, what's the one piece of advice that you would give someone entering through that student category?
Mm-hmm. What I would say is that your true north is this concept of modern marketing, which is a combination or the intersection of data, strategy, creative, technology, and experiences. Those 5 things. So data, strategy, creative, technology, experiences. So we have to make it our business to care about all those 5 pillars. And we have to be able to work with all those 5 pillars.
Okay. Same advice or same question, this time among the CMO network that would largely be your peers anyway, just among friends. What is the thing that you would say, hey, guys, ladies, we need to think about this, and we need to think about this differently?
So my advice to the CMO community would be digital maturity has to be the North Star. We have to be aiming for a one-to-one relationship, personalized customer experience. That's the only way to drive customer lifetime value. We need to be able to look at prospects and say, right, I'm gonna classify and categorize you guys in terms of your interests, in terms of your desires, in terms of your wants, in terms of your ability to spend, and how much value you actually represent to me as a marketer. And having that level of intelligence makes me a much, much more advanced marketer. So yeah, to the CMO community, I would say digital maturity is definitely a must-have. As a chartered marketer, I've got a lot of pride in our craft as marketers, as communication practitioners, and I think that we want to be able to speak confidently around the science of marketing as well as the art of marketing. We're not just out there doing creative for the sake of creativity. We're not just painting pretty pictures because we think that creativity is the be all and end all of business. Creativity is part of a value equation that
Right.
creates infinite value for all stakeholders. But it has to be supported by technology. It has to be supported by data, and we just have to have a broad approach to brand building.
Cool. I just wanted to ask from my tech support if we have questions that have come through. I'm going to mute for a second and just go through the live feed, if you don't mind. Cool, Alistair, while we get the questions, I have the privilege of asking you one more question. And I think my question largely revolves around your evolution as a marketer. When you look back at where you've come from to where you are, what's the stuff you wish you knew then that you know now?
I wish I knew that experiences are what people remember and talk about and share. I think for the longest time as marketers, we thought let's just come up with communication to entertain, to inform, to educate people. but we didn't really frame it as like an experience, because we're dealing with very few touch points. When I look at society today and the various moments in a person's life or a person's day, there are so many multiple moments, and only like well thought out experiences can actually help you, cut through the clutter, permeate, really, really stand out. Yeah, so I think the value of experience is something that I've come to appreciate over the years.
I've got another question here for you from Monica. It says, what key patterns have you seen come up online during the past 4 months? What a great question.
Key patterns come up online?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I think what we're seeing is there's massive search activity. People have questions, people have time, people have data. They're sitting at home and saying, banana bread recipe. What are the symptoms of COVID? What can I do to boost my immune system? That's one. Two is isolation and being cut off from, human beings are group beings. So they need to connect. They need to check in with people. They need to share how you feel, all of that stuff. We've seen a lot of activity. We've also seen an uptake in video. People have more time to watch videos, to be entertained, to learn. So there's been lots of that, certainly. And e-commerce has grown. We've seen the e-commerce apps take off. We've seen businesses scurry to try and develop delivery capability. Route to markets have been redefined and reshaped. So app downloads, there's that we've seen.
Yeah, I'm still here. I saw we had a little bit of a lag in our stream, but for the most part, I heard what Alistair was saying. Okay. All right. I've got a follow-up question here, a second question rather, from Larry. Larry Kumalo's asking, there's a material gap in attitudes between custodians of brands and custodians of data-centric spaces, such as the internet, and how are you navigating that when you're dealing with clients?
So I think any kind of learning can be uncomfortable, can be foreign, and can be threatening. So I think many decision makers who are possibly kind of in their 40s, when they were at university or college or technical, digital didn't exist. It wasn't a thing, right? So to acquire those skills and become comfortable in making decisions that were at some point the sole preserve of the IT department is quite a thing. So there's a massive culture shift that needs to happen. There's a massive skill acquisition shift that needs to happen. And it's really about finding safe spaces in which to learn. I mean, I have decided to be a lifelong student. If there's something that I don't know, I'll just go and look for it. There's ample self-education on the internet.
You didn't say you'll Google it. Sorry. You opened up for that one.
Google it, look it up. I found myself on Sunday afternoon watching YouTube videos on cloud computing or quantum computing because I want to learn, So honestly, this stuff is not rocket science. It's not hidden from us. If you're curious enough, and I think the real game changer when it comes to leadership qualities today is this constant curiosity and this drive to have impact and this hunger to be better, there's a lot of help and support, but obviously there's early adopters, there's laggards, but it's really about creating fertile ground for a digital maturity conversation. And the question is, how do you create that fertile ground?
Cool. I've got another one here from Celine Shah. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. What are the kinds of digital investments marketers should start with to show short-term impact to client? I think it's quite similar to the question that I asked you previously. In the short term, right now, what do we do?
So, I mean, so we could have a whole discussion around MarTech stacks, right? Technology stacks. But let's take CRM, customer relationship management. I mean, that's really the basis of it all. Just being able to collect data, being able to converse with your, consumers. And that data sits in different places. It comes from online search activity. It comes from subscriptions to newsletters. It comes from transaction data. So there's so much. And I think social media listening tools that helps you access data, real-time data. That's an investment one can make. There's so many tools like Salesforce and so many tools. There's off-the-shelf solutions one can pick up. But I think the best thing is just to get an IT consulting specialist to kind of sit you down and look at your marketing technology stack and say, right, what are we looking at here? What process do we want to automate? What experiences do you want to be able to deliver? What does your target audience look like? How do you want to segment it and dissect it? What are the variables you want to use to get intelligence? So yeah, so there's a whole lot there.
Cool. I heard the last part of what you were referring to. We scrambled a little bit, um, but for the most part, I'm listening to you saying there's a plethora of tools that we have at our disposal. It's just about selecting the ones I think that one is most comfortable with, and also tapping into IT capabilities or resources that one may have around them, particularly from an agency point of view, and source the advice of of that in order to get the best combination. Otherwise, just search for it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And I think also let's not forget the role of automation in making us more efficient and better at what we do. If we're going to be taking our costs into a fee conversation with client, we need to be able to justify that we have the best management of our costs.
Yes.
And part of cost management is automation, is in becoming more efficient. That doesn't mean fewer jobs. It just means justifying the jobs that are there. It means finding creative ways to be able to deliver value, incremental value, and just embracing technology.
Cool. Any last comments? We've gone through all our questions, and we are actually right on time. We've literally got 3 minutes to the wrap of this conversation, so that's excellent. Any last comments and nuggets that you would like to share?
So yeah, I mean, thanks to me. This has been a great chat. I think we need to personalize this conversation and look at our own households. If you've got kids, are your kids now spending time on devices? A year ago, you might have thought, no devices in my household, no technology. Kids must read books or play outside or get dirty, because dirt is good, as a famous washing powder brand told us. But today, there's a blended learning happening in education
Yeah.
spaces. There is so much useful stuff on devices for kids. So I think we need to personalize these things and put ourselves in consumer shoes and say, what kind of content is relevant to me? Therefore, I want to be able to deliver relevant content to my target audiences.
Mm,
Yeah, really just personalize it, walk in the other person's shoes, and you'll be able to work out, the do's and don'ts.
yeah. Cool. You touched on something, and I mean, understanding our audience now, I don't necessarily think that it's directly relevant to the audience that this webinar would reach, but often digital access is seen as very, very, in fact, it is. It's very class based, right? There's masses of South Africans that do not have the sort of digital access we're talking about now. And I think about the clients and brands that service that type of consumer. What do you say is, how do they look at embracing digital access and perhaps enabling digital access for their consumers?
So we've got to see it as a layered approach, and as there's
Yeah.
a lot of work that's happening to expand access. The telcos, government, technology companies that are laying down undersea cables from Europe all around Africa. So there's a lot that's happening. But as much as we know that data is not free, it costs telcos to make data available. There will always be a cost and a price for consumers to pay. I think it's really about how do we give people access to life skills,
Yeah.
Regardless of their income levels. If you haven't got data, but you are able to access educational content on a zero-rated website, you're fine.
Yes.
If lecturers are not able to live stream lectures to students in rural areas who don't have data, what they will do is they'll record the lectures and make them available on a university website, which is zero rated. So there are creative ways to still equip people with life skills. There will
Yeah.
always be a need for eventing. There will always be a need for activations. There will always be a need for one-on-one education. So technology is not going to replace all those touch points. It's merely going to make it easier and cheaper and faster. And I do believe that we will get to a time where we will have mass democratization of access to the internet. The digital divide is being bridged, and we will get to a point where it will basically not be an issue anymore.
Cool. Thank you. We are now 1 minute over time. I'd like to thank you for your time, like I said, and to everyone that is watching, please do not forget to share the feedback form. To give your feedback on our feedback form, and we look forward to seeing you for our next chat, where next guest will also need no introduction. Cool. Thanks, Alistair.
So, thanks very much. It's
Cool.
been lovely chatting. Take care. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.